Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Student Association of Energy, I would like to welcome you on the last lecture of the Donald Banki Memorial Semester, which is held about Germany's Energiewende aspect of a system operator. It is a special honor to me to introduce you Mr. Jens Jacobs, today present here. Mr. Jacobs graduated as industrial engineer in 2011 from Aachen University of Technology. After, he joined the Department of Transmission System Operation of Amprion GmbH and has been educated and gained experience as dispatcher at the main control center, Brauweiler. Further, he is involved in several international working groups such as ENTSO-E. The lecture is going to be 75 minutes long. At the end of we answer you for questions. I would like to ask you to not interrupt the lecture with your questions. Furthermore, I would like to ask you to switch your mobile phones off, please. I respectfully ask Mr. Jacobs to give your lecture.
So thank you very much for the introduction and welcome everyone here. I hope you can understand me even in the back rows. First of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to state some experiences and facts about the so-called German Energiewende, transition of energy system, you might call it. And so the title of my presentation then is Current and Imminent Challenges for the Transmission System Operator in Germany. I divided this presentation into 6 parts. First of all, I will give you slightly some general introduction about the framework of European law and German law. And I will tell you something about the transmission system operation in general, also explaining a little bit the structure in Germany, giving you facts about the major challenges we are facing concerning the transition of electricity system due to renewable energy sources. And also a major point will be then impact of renewable energy sources on conventional generation and on the market. And finalizing this, this presentation with another important topic which cannot be left out is the cooperation between TSOs and DSOs. And then at the end, some outlook and conclusion. So let's directly jump in. What's the legal framework? Most of you probably know the European laws, the so-called EU 2020, which were set up. So until 2020, European Commission decided that there should be a reduction of 20% of energy consumption, also a reduction of 20% of greenhouse gas emission, and on the other side, an increase of 20% of energy efficiency. Another important fact is the establishment of European legislation, the introduction of the so-called network codes to guarantee system stability, security, and to harmonize market rules throughout ENTSO-E, throughout Europe. A little bit more in detail go the rules or the legislation of the federal government of Germany, which one important topic is the nuclear phase-out till 2022. After the Fukushima incident in 2011, Germany decided to phase out of the nuclear power energy, and we will see some slides on this later on. And also, in contrast to the EU 2020 goals, not in contrast, but in particular, Germany decided to get 35% power generation from renewables until 2020, even 80% until 2050. Also 40% reduction of greenhouse gases until 2020, and 20% reduction of primary energy consumption until 2022. So you might ask the question, Germany, vadis, where are you going? Road to green revolution, just again some of the steps you have shown on the slides before, but there's an energy concept of Germany stating until 2020 this 35%, and go on, here could also be 80% of renewables in 2050. This was just a really short introduction about the frameworks we are dealing with, and we'll now go on a little bit more in detail in the transmission system operation in general. Since I never know which audience I'm facing, just quite slightly a slide showing the way from production to the end consumer. So we have the so-called extra high voltage network, 380 and 2020 kV. This is the transmission system my company is dealing with. So you see here the lines with the power generations. A little bit more with the substations where it is distributed. You see here this windmill, which is feed in the in the high voltage network, the 110 kV, and we go on with the medium voltage up to low voltage to the end consumer, so to every one of us at home. This is really just slightly, again, how the whole system works. And some other facts about the electrical system, the transmission system. The transmission grid consists of physical units, lines, transformers, substations, different kinds of, and is an international meshed system, which is quite an important topic we need to take into consideration. So what does this mean for the sensitive real-time system? We all know that electrical energy is not directly storable. We have to have balance between energy consumption and production at all time. The system, of course, is operated 24/7, so 24 hours, 355 days a year, 365 days a year. Our legislation is EU or national laws, and one important topic is that transmission system operator is in charge of the security of supply. So again, a little bit more simplified, the structure, and especially for describing the structure in Germany, we have the TSO grid, which is 380 and 2020 kV, where most of all the bulk industry is located and the conventional generation is feeds in. And besides this, we have the so-called DSO grid, distribution system operator, where mainly all of the dispersed generation, the renewable energy, is located. And of course, at the end of the line, the households again. So now a little bit more on, or to make clear about my company. So you see here, this is the transmission grid of Amprion, mainly in the western part of Germany. Displayed here, you see in red the 380 kV and in green the 220 kV lines. We operate more or less approximately 12,000 kilometers of lines and 165 substations. We have connected conventional generation to our grid, mainly lignite-fired power plants and some hydropower plants, with some up to 40 gigawatts. We can keep this number in mind for the renewables later. Maybe some last important topic, as said before, Amprion is interconnected in the ENTSO-E grid, and we have 5 foreign countries we have direct connections to. So how is now the whole German transmission system market organized? This is quite a unique structure, because usually every country has one transmission system operator, like Mavrier here in Hungary. In Germany, it's historically grown that we have 4. Amprion, this is the one I'm working for. There's also some connection here, which is not displaced. We have Transnet BW, Tenet in the middle, and 50 Hertz in the eastern part of Germany. So, please let me state some of the main responsibilities we are dealing with before I come then to the major challenges. Amprion, as one of the 4 German TSOs, has of course some tasks for itself, some TSO responsibilities. These are the responsibilities every TSO has to face. Due to the situation of 4 TSOs in Germany, Amprion takes a special role for the German TSOs, so the so-called national responsibilities as well. And then in ENTSO-E, it's organized to have a kind of coordination center for the southern part and for the northern part of ENTSO-E and of Europe, you might say. So some international responsibilities Amprion is dealing with as well. So just slightly some TSO responsibilities: system control and system management of the transmission grid, which is quite obvious. Congestion management, planning, ancillary services. One important topic is also load frequency control and controlling power range in the Amprion control zone, and of course, system balancing. These are the TSO responsibilities. Now a little bit national responsibilities. This is not the case for every country and for every TSO, but Germany takes also the coordination of the power exchange programs for the whole German market, and also the load frequency control for the German block, besides the load frequency control of each TSO in its own region. Germany organized some, let's say, extra step of load frequency control through Amprion for Germany, and some national quantity balancing of the German control block. Now at the last step for the international responsibilities, and there are just 2 TSOs facing these responsibilities in Europe, and this is Swissgrid, the Swiss TSO for the southern control block, and Amprion for the northern control block. And it's, of course, the international coordination of the power exchange. We have international quantity balancing. We have congestion forecast for the control block, and some other hosting and services provided by Amprion. So here, quite simplified picture, but really important point is the load frequency control and power balance. So I assume that most of you know that in ENTSO-E or in continental Europe, we have a set point frequency of 50 Hertz where the transmission grid is operated. And the major goal, the major aim of each TSO is to keep this set point of frequency stable at 50 Hertz. So every time we have a deviation between consumption and production, this deviation has to be balanced by using so-called reserve power. And this deviation might be caused by forecast deviation of renewables, also forecast deviation of the load of the consumption. Certain topics are there. So I'm not quite sure if every one of you is familiar with the so-called N-1 criterion to operate a transmission system. But this is really an important topic everyone has to keep in mind, or at least from TSO point of view, we have to keep in mind. We see here simplified meshed grid of 2 TSOs. And the N-1 criterion says that even if one, for example, line fails, energy supply needs to be guaranteed without any disturbance. So you can see it here a little bit animated. You see this line here now starts to fail, and the energy runs beside it. And now we see here the same for the connection to a DSO grid. If one connection fails, we have several other ones we can use. And this is something every TSO needs to assure and to guarantee. So also connected to this N-1 criterion, we have different areas. Each TSO not controls, but observes. We have the so-called responsibility area. This is this green-shaped part here. This is the main responsibility area of Amprion. So this is our grid. This is our lines. And then you see this so-called observability area. This is this yellow-shaped part. This is something we don't operate, but every TSO has this so-called observability area in his analysis and calculations also included, because this is onto a certain amount, or let's say to a certain how you would say it, sorry. Let's say another way. We see here, for example, France. We display a little bit of France in our system as well. And the reason for this is why if there is an outage in France, this might cause some problems or might cause an effect in Germany as well. And all of these yellow-shaped parts have an influence on the Amprion grid if something happens in their grid. So, and you see from 160 substations we own by ourselves, more than 400 additional substations now need to be taken into account in our security calculations. And this is dramatic extent of data volume for online calculations, for load flow and N-1 security. So then maybe as a one last slide on this topic, to show you again the European interconnected system. You see here all the countries which are part of ENTSO-E, the so-called European Network of Transmission System Operator for Electricity. More than 42 TSOs in 35 countries, dealing or supplying more than 500 million citizens. And yeah, on a total length of transmission lines from over 300,000 kilometers. And yeah, maybe just keep in mind, ENTSO-E supplies 500 million, more than 500 million citizens, so each of us is affected by this as well. So far for the transmission operation in general. I would like now to show you some major challenges we are facing with at the moment. And starting with something I already mentioned before, the nuclear phase-out in 2011, or decided in 2011. So more or less directly after the incident in Fukushima, so where a tsunami hit a nuclear power plant. The federal government of Germany decided that Germany needs to phase out as well. So it was decided that nuclear power plants should not be used anymore. And as one first cause of this, directly affected power plants, and you see them crossed out on this map. 8 nuclear power plants were shut down immediately, causing a loss of more than 8,000 megawatts of generation in Germany. And you see that 5 of these 3 nuclear power plants which were shut down are located in the southern part of Germany. But this was just the first step. So how does it go on? And here you see the German till 2022, it is planned and foreseen that Germany does not have any nuclear power plant at all in his system anymore. And you see here the different steps when the nuclear power plants shall be shut down. And it's important or interesting to see as well, if you see the next 5 years, so until 2019, an additional of 4,000 megawatt will be shut down, and all of this 4,000 megawatt will be shut down in the southern part of Germany again. So we are facing the problem that the southern part of Germany has less and less energy production, but still it is one of the main consumption areas in Germany. So mainly our industry is located in the southern part. So we're facing really big problems there. And in total, another 12,000 megawatts will be disconnected from the grid in Germany. So having seen this, the slides shows you the generation mix in Germany at the end of last year. And you see that there's a share of renewable energy from 23% in 2013 already. If you keep in mind that the European Union has the goal to have 20% of renewables in 2020, Germany already fulfills this goal at the moment. And maybe just a little bit more in detail, you see here what are the main renewable drivers in Germany: wind, biomass, PV, and hydro. Whereas biomass is not such a big topic because it's more or less stable. It's not as volatile as wind and PV. So in the next slides and in the next next information I will give you, I will more or less focus only on wind and PV generation. So here you see the development of the German capacity, generation of capacity since 2010. And I would like to focus your view on the yellow and the green line. So in yellow, you see the nuclear generation, and in green, you see the renewable generation, just focusing on wind and PV in this case. So you see that after 2010, where we had a share of, let's say, 22% of generation from nuclear power plants, due to the nuclear phase-out, it decreased to 15% end of 2013. And on the other side, renewables went from, let's say, 16% up to 23%, as we have seen. What's also interesting to see on this slide is the total generation in Germany. So you can see that in the last 4 years, there has been an increase of total generation, which is, yeah, I would say not really the goal of the European Union, but we can't avoid it so far. And now let's go back to renewables. We have here a slide showing you where is wind energy located in Germany. Can be easily seen that most of the part, or most of it, is in the northern eastern part of Germany, and in the southern part, where we have learned, right, that nuclear power plants are shut down, especially in the south, but there's also no wind. And as I said, in Germany, wind generation is installed in the northern and in the eastern part, and because of this, and because of the shutdown of the nuclear power plants in the southern part of Germany, the high wind power leads to bulk energy flows from the north to the south, where mainly our industry is located. How does this look like for photovoltaic now? Photovoltaic is more or less the contrast to that. You see this dark blue means there's more or less no photovoltaic capacity installed at all. This is mainly in the southern part. Of course, this is due to the regional effects. The North Sea is located here, so you will have more wind on the North Sea than on the land, of course. And usually in the south, there's more sun than in the north. So, but what does this mean? This does not have a direct effect on the power flow from north to south, which we have seen with the wind energy, but this has a major impact on the power flow from the DSO grid to the TSO grid. So we are facing now, and I will show you this later on some slides as well, that depending on the generation of PV, we already have power flow from the lower grids to the higher grids, which was not the case in the past. And this is a new challenge and a new task DSOs and TSOs have to deal with. I will give you now some numbers, figures about wind generation installed in the world. And you see here the top 10 countries of total wind capacity over the last 3 years. I highlighted here Germany. And of course, you see that especially China, also due to the size of the country, is far away from everyone else, with nearly, and I assume since this is 2014 first half, the latest number, the upper, that they have already more than 100,000 megawatts installed of wind energy in China. But you still see that Germany, besides the US and China, is far-reaching from all the other countries in the world. And I put a figure here for Hungary, which I just learned earlier today, that it's even a little bit less than 500 megawatt. So just for you to give you a slight impression where Hungary is on this table, or would be on this table, as I learned, it's around 350 megawatt and not 500, so excuse that. But yes, still not really a lot, but okay, you always have to take in consideration the size of the land and the load and all of this. So just to give you a slight impression. Now, really interesting slide, as I think, is the development of wind power in Germany. We see here the columns display the yearly newly installed capacity. And of course, slightly, it can be easily seen that in the beginning of 2000, 2001, 2003, there has been a major, major hype, let's say it like this, to install and to build new windmills. But this decreased a little bit, also due to decreasing of incentives the German government is giving to everyone. But still a quite high niveau. And what's interesting to see is then the graph of the totally installed generation in Germany, which is now more than 35,000 megawatt of wind capacity installed in Germany. But taking this into consideration, knowing the number and the increase, the production of wind, the monthly production of wind over now 2006 to 2014, June 2014, you see you already get a first glance about the volatility we are talking about when we're talking about wind energy. So you see here for every month of the year since 2016 the production, and can easily be seen that in the winter months there's a higher production than in summer months. This is of course related to weather issues, so obviously there's more wind in winter than in summer. But what is really interesting on this slide, if you look at this green really high value here, which is nearly 7,500 gigawatt hours produced in January 2007, and then you take even the newest value from this year, so in January 2014 we produced more or less, let's say a little bit more than 6,000 gigawatt hours. And if you compare 7,500 to 6,000, and I may go back to the last slide and take into consideration the overall installed capacity, 35,000 in 2014, and it's not so easily seen, but it's really more or less 20,000 in 2007. So we have much more installed capacity this year, but still production is less than several years ago. So this is really, you see that there's really volatility, and not really, you can't really plan with this kind of generation because you never really know how much it will be. The same now for PV. And you will realize a little bit later what's really interesting about this. So you see here that Germany is really far, far away from everyone else. Even China is, has more than 15,000 megawatt less installed capacity as Germany. So we are still there on a really, I wouldn't say role model, because definitely not everything works quite as it should be in Germany. But this is quite impressive that we are still in front of this, and I hope now this number is correct. For Hungary, 50 megawatt. No, it's more already? Really? 30 megawatt. Okay, but it's not still not so much. Okay, and this is a number from 2013, so in 2014 it might be a little bit more. Again, now here, this slide about the development of PV in Germany. And of course, this number is quite low, but this is just until half of the year, so it will increase a little bit. But you can see also here a quite big decrease of new installations. And this is also related to the lower incentives the German federal government is paying everyone to install PV generation. And if you see this number here, we are already now, we have more than this, but you see 37,000 megawatts of PV generation. I can remember, or if you remember, for wind we had 35. So we have more PV generation installed than wind, and this was definitely not foreseen several years ago. So somewhere between 2012, 2013, in Germany, the capacity of PV overtook wind. And this is quite impressive because, as I said, no one expected this to happen. And that's the reason why afterwards the German government said, okay, we'll pay you less money to install your installations because it's getting a little bit too much in a short time. Here you see again the monthly production. And a little bit different from wind. Of course, we have a lot more generation in the summer period than in the winter periods. So it's more or less the contrary if you look at the average curve. But here it can also be seen, and this is an interesting fact, that actually the more you have capacity you have installed, the more production you have. And this was not the case for wind. You know, I've seen in wind, 2007 was more than 2014. But actually here it is the case that every year we have more installation, we produce more of PV generation. This was now all numbers for the whole German market. I will give you just one slide for our regional zone, for Amprion, which also displays again the, let's say, the change of wind and PV installations. So you see the in gray in the back, you see the installed capacity of wind, which is more or less constant, I would say, from 4,500 up to 6,000 from January 2010 till end of 2013. But you see here in the beginning of 2012, you see how far PV generation got instead of wind. So coming from here, going up there, we have in 3 years from 2,000 up to 8,000 megawatt in our regional zone, Amprion, which is quite impressive, I think. Having seen now all this data on installations and capacity, how does it really work with the generation? So we have here a slide for wind energy, installed capacity and production for the year 2013. You see in red the installed capacity over the year. So you can see that every month there was a little bit more installed. And you see here the generation curve. Again, you see this shape we have seen before, but you also see that the high volatility of this kind of energy. And I will just give you now two dates. The dates with the minimum wind we had in 2013, which was 126 megawatt. More or less 0.4% of the installed capacity was really producing. And on the contrary, we have the maximum wind generation, which was about roughly 26,000 megawatt, which displays, let's say, nearly 80%. And we as a transmission system operator, or actually the whole system, has to deal with this difference. So we have to be prepared for a situation where we have nearly no generation, and we have to be prepared where we nearly have all the capacity installed generating. This aim can be seen for PV. You see here, again, for 2013, the installed capacity for PV, and from the steps you can also see that there's still more PV going to be installed than wind energy. And you see the production, mainly in summer, but still there's might be some huge gaps. And here I just give you one figure, and this is the figure of maximum PV. Maximum PV was, in 2013, nearly 24,000 megawatt, which displays 70% of the installed capacity. Why I'm giving you only one figure? Well, I can imagine that everyone knows that during the night there's no generation of PV at all. So there's no need to display this here, because otherwise there would be several minimum PV generation. Now we have seen the single generations for PV and wind. If you combine both of them, you see, first of all, the gap gets much bigger. This is now the sum of wind and PV in generation and in installed capacity. And I inserted also the average generation for 2013, which was less than 10,000 megawatts. What can be seen here, if you keep in mind the numbers I just showed you before, we have also a minimum infeed and a maximum infeed of renewables, talking about wind and PV only, which was 148, so approximately 0.5%, and up to nearly 36,000, which was then, let's say, positive 60%. You keep in mind we had wind 80, we had PV 50. If you combine it, we come up to 60% of the installed generation at this moment, which was the best value we have faced in 2013. So the values, if you look at both, are less than if you look at every single generation. And this even gets worse, you might say, if you look from 2011 till now. And you see here, again, in 2012, there was a big jump, a big increase. And this is the same slides, the same values as shown before for 2013, only now from 11 to 2014. And during this period of 3.5 years, we had the minimum in 2013. That's the same value we have seen on the slide before. But you might have thought, okay, in 2011 there was less generation or less capacity installed, so there might have been also a lower value. But since 2011, this is the lowest value we have faced on this. And also the highest value is the same value we have seen on the slide before. So there has not been, until now, in 2014 there has been a higher value. But in the years before, it never has got this value. And if you keep now in mind the unpredictability of especially then the renewables here, I just will show you an example for wind generation now and the forecast of wind generation. This is an example of May 2014. So this is the forecast from the 25th of May for the 26th. You see here the so-called forecast combination in green. I hope it can be seen also in the back. This graph here. And this graph is some calculation and assumption a system we developed makes out of all the other ones. So we have a lot of contracts with forecasting companies and weather companies and all of this, providing us with their forecasts. And you also see here, or already see here, the deviations and the differences of the single forecasts. And if you just look at the end of the day here, we have this one who says it's nearly 10,000 megawatt, and this one says it's nearly 5,500. So we are facing forecasts already a difference of 4 to 5,000 megawatts from time to time. And we have to build a combination out of it, which hopefully displaces the best of it. So I will show you now how it happened then actually the next day. So the green curve is the same as we have seen before. This is the first forecast. And the blue one is then the actual in-feed, which you see especially here is quite good estimated. From time to time there's a difference which we have to face. But still, concerning wind generation and forecast of wind generation, we have an accuracy of about 95%. So we are really, really good in predicting the forecast of wind. PV, it looks a little bit different. That's why I'm not showing some slides about this. No, but this is also because there are not so many, companies offering forecasts for wind. And you can imagine that, especially, for example, in the morning, some fog or something like this, or if it snows, and the snow is on the PV panels, this cannot be really forecasted. That's why there's a lot of effort put in increasing the accuracy of PV forecasting as well. Wind, we are really good at the moment. PV, still work to do. Okay, besides this excursus, I want to come back now to some examples about let's say, the challenge we face in renewables covering the load we have in Germany. I have here an example. It was a Thursday on April 2014, and it was a day with the lowest share of renewable energy covering load we had in Germany 2014. You see here in blue, this is the load we had in Germany, and in red, again, the combination of PV and wind energy. So the worst moment at that day was at 9 p.m. We had a load of nearly 66,000 megawatt, but only covering 240 megawatt of it with renewables. So as a conclusion of this, approximately 0.4% were covered by renewables, and more than 65,000 megawatts had to be covered by conventional generation or import. And as you can imagine, this is definitely not a value you can import. So most of it came out of conventional generation. And these slides are now, and the purpose is to show you that conventional generation is definitely and absolutely necessary to keep security of supply alive. And you will see this later on in some slides why I mentioned this here specifically, and I will remind you of that. So let's see now, okay, this was let's say, a bad example. Let's take a good example now. We have the day with the highest share of renewable energy covering load. It was a Sunday in May. So first of all, of course, on a Sunday, the load is much lower than during the week. Good for us. So we had the load here around, let's say, 50,000. And on the other side, we see here in red again the sum of wind and PV, which was nearly 36,000. So we see at 2 p.m., so shortly afternoon, we had a load of 53,000 megawatt and a generation of renewables from nearly 37. So here it looks actually quite promising. 70% of the load were covered. And only, you could say, or you could say still 17,000 megawatt need to be generated by conventional power plants or import. We have seen now let's say the worst and the best. Let's take now 2 more slides of this, just to make the point. This is now the day with the lowest renewable infeed we had. Was a Saturday, so also a weekend and quite low load. And we see here at 6 a.m. in the morning, we had a PV infeed of 180 megawatt, 2014. So this is the lowest value for 2014 so far. And this more or less says again 0.4% were only covered by renewables, and more than 46,000 megawatt need to be covered by conventional generation and import. So not as high as at the worst example, but still really high. And now we give you, or I give you an example of the day with the highest renewable infeed in 2014. Again, in blue, the load, and this was a Monday, so you see the load increased a lot compared to the last 2 slides. So we are more than, in this time, we are more than 70,000 megawatt of load in Germany. But also we have nearly, let's say, 40,000 megawatts in PV and wind generation. And at this time, where there has been the highest infeed of PV and wind, which was nearly 38,000 megawatt, and a load of, let's say, 71,000 megawatt, we covered still only 50% of the load. So still 33,000 megawatt need to be covered by conventional power plants and by import. And this is the time with the highest infeed we have experienced so far by renewables. Okay, 2 more slides. More or less to make this point clear. We see here the so-called duration curve of load covering with wind and PV in 2012. So it might be a little bit confusing at the beginning, but actually it's a quite easy slide. You see here, let's say in 1,000 hours of a year, you could say you can cover the load by 25%. 25% of the load can be covered in 1,000 hours a year by renewables. Of course, in 1 hour, the best was nearly 50%. But if you look here at the end, and this is actually the most important for us, because this is what we have to deal with. We have to guarantee security of supply for the whole year. So we rather take into consideration what happens in 8,000 hours than in 1,000. And if you take this number, we have, let's say 2% covered by renewables. And I will show you now the same slide for 2013. You will see that there is some deviation. I flip a little bit, so 12 to 13. And I would like to focus your view on this part. I'll flip back now, and then on this part again. So you see this one here. It increases quite a lot. But please now have a look at this part here again. I don't know if you can see a real difference. I don't. So you see, of course, this is also an outcome of the increasing capacity in a few times it really helps and it increases, and we could cover nearly 60%. But in most of the times, it's still less than 10%, less than 5% we can cover. This is what we have to deal with and what we have to count on. So enough of this. Let's go to another challenge. And the other challenge I already told you before on the slide was the distribution of PV generation in Germany, mainly in the southern part of Germany. That now we are facing the situation that from time to time we have a load flow from the lower DSO grid to the higher TSO grid. So you see here an example of a day with low in-feed of PV. So it's just PV now, so photovoltaic. You see here it was mainly, I don't know, 2,000 megawatts in peak at that day. And you see in green and in blue 2 examples of transformers connecting the DSO and the TSO grid. So these are connection points where you can see the load flow from the TSO to the DSO grid. You see here, if we are above this line, we have a flow from TSO to DSO grid. This is the usual. This is what we have experienced since transmission and distribution system exist. This is the normal way. But there's, of course, a reason why I have DSO to TSO displayed here as well, because if we take another example, a day with high in-feed of PV, you see now we are here more than 20,000 megawatt of PV in generation. And you see now, yeah, we have a power flow from DSO to TSO grid. So there's so much generation in the TSO grid that the TSO can't handle it, does not need all of this. So it puts it back to the TSO. And this load flow, change in load flow, is a really new situation everyone has to deal with, and everyone has to find solutions for, because it's not like going to the left, going to the right. It's something different if we do it. But for load flow, this has really a lot of influence on the whole system. So this is one point. And to make clear, this is then for a whole year. You see again the generation of PV on this side, and here you see then the in-feed again from TSO to DSO grid or from DSO to TSO grid. And of course, that's what I've showed you on the slide before. Proves what I told you. The more in-feed of PV we have, the more often we're facing the situation that the DSO grid, there's a power flow from the DSO grid into the TSO grid. Okay, this is another point. Now let's have another look on, I called it Correlation of Wind and PV Energy Production and Control Program Germany. Control program is nothing else than import and export of Germany. So you see here again, and this red line is the trend of it. The more generation we have out of renewables, now again, now we are back to wind and PV, not only PV. You see with an increasing generation, Germany, of course, exports more and more, and there's nearly no import at all when we have a lot of generation. When there's instead more or less no generation, and that's what I've had shown you already before in some slides, we need to import, of course, because then Germany cannot cover everything alone. And I might raise a question to the audience here. Someone might think could pump storage power plants solve this problem? I don't know if any one of you would say yes or no. Up to everyone by themselves. And I will give you the answer now. You see here the peak loads of Germany throughout 1 year. And I don't know, someone wants to guess how much of this part actually then, or how much of this blue part could be covered by pump storage? Is someone, maybe someone thinks, okay, pump storage can cover, I don't know, say, like until this line or until this line. Well, it might surprise you, but this is actually the fact. There's a small red dot. I don't know if you can see it in the back. I think I couldn't see it if I would you, but there is a little red dot, and this is the capacity of pump storage we have in Germany. And actually, Germany has quite a lot of pump storage. You see here some numbers from the so-called network development plan in Germany. We have a peak load of nearly 68 gigawatt, pump storage capacity of 6, annual consumption of, let's say, 500, and a storage capacity of 0.04. So the answer is quite obvious. No, pump storage cannot solve this problem. It might help in some situations, of course, in peak situations, but in general, it's not the solution for every challenge we are facing. Okay, enough of this. Let's see what's the impact on the conventional generation directly, and what's the impact on the market. We have not talked about the market yet. So you see here a slide, again, renewable infeed and impacts on thermal generation. You have seen similar slides or slides like this before. We see in red the PV generation and in green on top the wind generation. But we have now two new curves. You see in blue here the hourly market price intraday. So this is the price on the day the generation occurred. And in purple, you see the spot price day ahead. And I don't know if you have looked on this scale, but everything below this line are negative prices. What does it mean? Negative price is nothing else that you offer energy to someone and you have to pay him to take it. So it's not that you get paid for the service you provide. No, you have to pay someone to take your service. You might now ask yourself, is this really the case it should be? And no, it's not, but it's the truth. So sometimes we or the generators have to pay someone to take their produced energy. And you see, of course, this is an example with a high infeed, the prices get low. And some other important aspect you can see on this slide, which is referred to the flexibility also of conventional power plants. We see an increase in 1 hour from 9 to 10 of more than 4 gigawatt in 1 hour. And we see also a decrease in the evening of more than 6 gigawatt in 1 hour. And this decrease has to be covered by conventional power plants, because this does not mean that there's more consumption of 5 gigawatts. It's just that there is more generation out of renewables. And this number also does not mean that there's less consumption or load. No, it still remains more or less the same, but this number has to be in a short time then covered by conventional power plants. And you see here now on the second slide, I guess you have realized that these two lines have not changed. They are the same. But we see now some gray and some yellow. Gray is the conventional generation. You see, of course, okay, we have learned that here was a shift of more than 6 gigawatts in 1 hour. This was then mainly covered by conventional generation, but also we were exporting before, and then we started to import. So this more or less sums up also a little bit again the slides we have seen before. If we are not able to produce enough generation or enough energy by renewables, we have to take conventional power plants and import of energy into account. And here again, this was now before, this was the 6 gigawatt I showed you, and we increased 4 gigawatts of conventional power plants, which was also already an increase of nearly 20%. And these are really high numbers. And most of the rest was covered by import instead of export, but also by energy reserves we have installed. Now on the next slide, there it is. Again, we are focusing a little bit on the market at the moment. So you see the correlation of renewable generation production to the day ahead price. And you can see that this is now since 2011. So these are then generation in percentage of the installed capacity. And actually what is most important is this trend line here. So you see in 2011, we have started with an energy price day ahead of, let's say, around about 50 euros per megawatt hour. And we are ending already by 35 euros per megawatt hour. So there's a difference of 15 euros per megawatt hour, which especially for gas-fired power plants is a really dangerous situation, because they cannot cover the costs anymore with this energy price. And that's one of the reasons why there's such a decrease in generation of gas-fired power plants, and why also no generation company wants to build new power plants, because they won't make money with it. And one last slide concerning the price or the effect on the market. It's also since 2011. You may notice this graph I have shown you before. This is the generation of wind and PV. And the trend line, so we can see, okay, down from 8,000 up to 10,000 as an average generation over the year we have so far. And we have now a new graph, which is this yellow one. And this is, again, the day-ahead price on the exchange, on the power exchange. So this is the price you can get for your energy if you sell it, or the price you have to pay if you need one. And this is, again, the trend line here in black. So you see this is the numbers we have to take into account. It decreases from nearly 50 down to 36. And I will just give you one example of Christmas 2012. We had quite high renewable generation here, up to 30,000 megawatts. And this was really on the first and the second holiday, so the 25th and the 26th of December 2012, the negative spot prices of minus 240 euros. So, of course, this is just for a certain time, like an hour or half an hour. But still, at this certain time, you had to pay 240 euros for someone to take 1 megawatt hour of your energy. And for the French market, especially at this time, it was even worse, because the price there was down to minus 2,000. It's not possible in Germany because there's a price cap, but in France at the same time it was up to minus 2,000. So let me sum up a little bit what I've said in the last slides. Renewable energy sources push conventional power plants out of the market. That's what we have seen from the last slides. The price is decreasing, so they don't get enough money for their generation. We don't need to talk about all of this because we have covered this earlier, but we have an increase of share of renewables. Because of the low prices, it's got unprofitable for power generation companies to run their generation. And just one important topic of this, the shutdown of thermal power plant generation capacity in the grid endangers system stability. This is really the case. And maybe just one more comment on this. You might see here the different types of generation. And you see, of course, wind and PV is pushing all the other conventional power plants over the edge. But there's already no nuclear power plant at all anymore. So you see, it was not even worth to take it into consideration while establishing this graphic. Okay, coming to my last point and taking time into consideration, but still, nevertheless, really important point, cooperation of TSOs and DSOs and the so-called cascading in generation dispatching. It's just a few slides. So we have heard about this N-1 security criterion earlier. And what I want to show you here now, we have this transmission grid, which is usually one TSO, so single TSO. But we have no direct connection to renewables. The renewables are mainly in a DSO grid. So we have to talk to the DSOs if we want to interfere or want to decrease, more or less, renewable generation. So the TSO needs to talk to the DSO. First of all, there's not only one DSO, there are several DSOs in a grid. But this is not the last level, because the DSO also has several DSOs connected to his grid, which are not connected to the TSO. So let's go one level down. We already see it's getting a lot more people you have to talk to the lower you get in the level. And this can be displayed several times. So that's why we just shorten this by level n. The TSO only knows the DSOs directly connected to his grid. He has no communication, no contact to the DSOs, which are connected to the DSOs in his grid. So you see that there's a lot of communication going on in the grid. And this is also important because you can see here, which is really important, are these two figures. You see this upper level here is for the TSO grid, and then you go down to the DSOs. And the number of generation units, because of the renewables, is much higher in the lower levels of the DSO grids than at the TSO grid. The TSO grid has the big producing generation units, but all the PV and solar, the solar panels and the windmills are mainly located in the DSO grid. But on the other side, the level of automation, so the possibility to influence the generation is much higher in the TSO grid because it's much easier to communicate to a big power plant than to several thousand single PV panels. So having a lot more generation units to deal with, but actually having no really good means to communicate to them. And just one last slide before I come to my conclusion. We have this so-called cascade, which can be seen as like a puzzle. So we have the TSO, who's responsible for monitoring the whole system, the overall system. His responsibility is security of supply. This is the main goal. He is operative contact to DSOs, which are connected, and generators, which are connected at his TSO level. And he requests support by the DSOs. The DSOs are monitoring their own system, of course. They are have operative contact to generators in their level, clear as well, and they support the TSO if he needs support. Then we have the generation facilities. They support TSOs and DSOs to secure the security of supply through decreasing and increasing the power of generation units. That's what they can do. And then there's one last missing stone. This is a consumer. So that's every one of us. What can we do? Yeah. Of course, they are industrial consumers who can do much more than we can do. But they're also end users. And the only thing we can do is that we can get disconnected. It's the only thing we can really help TSOs and DSOs. And actually, that's nothing we want. And that's nothing we want as consumers, and that's nothing we want as a TSO to disconnect consumers. But it's one of the last resorts we have in case we can't handle the situation anymore. Okay, so let's come to the outcome and the conclusion of my presentation. Therefore, is the question, what is now the influence of wind and PV generation and power trading on the grid? Yeah, for us in Germany, quite easy, huge load flows, especially from north to south. Therefore, we need to expand our grid a little bit. To sum it up, we are facing a so-called wind busbar in the north, so mainly the wind in the north. We're facing a PV or solar busbar in the south. And since I may remind you of the slide we had for nuclear power phase out. That's why you see here now this dark green. These were former nuclear power plants supplying these areas. Now there's no supply from nuclear power plants anymore. So this needs to be supplied from something else. And we have learned wind and PV is not always there for us. So we need to somehow transport this energy to the centers where we need it. Therefore, these are, let's say, the 5 major projects we are dealing with in Germany at the moment. These are all HVDC lines, so high voltage direct current lines. And it's planned then to connect them, these 2 busbars, to get the wind energy to the south, and if not necessary, to get the PV energy into the north. And this is now a schematic graphic. I will show you now the official version from the so-called German Grid Development Plan, the NEP. You can see here the lines I've showed you before. And I don't want to focus you on all these numbers, just maybe one number to take into consideration. About 20 billion euros invest in one time. That's what we TSOs want to do, and what we TSOs need to do to secure security of supply in the future. But only because we want to do it does not mean that we allowed to do it. So we want to do it, but there's a lot of protests going on from consumers, from government as well. So it's really a major topic we are dealing with. And now my final slide. Conclusion. We have learned the current challenges for transmission system operators are, first of all, stimulation of the European electricity market integration. We have this. We have integration of renewable sources, mainly wind and PV. On the other side, we have changes in generation patterns, shutdown of nuclear power plants, pushed out of the market generation. And another point is congestion management and management of critical situations. Let me once again remind you about the current and future challenges for thermal power plants. Decrease utilization, and we have flexibility needs and growing load gradients. And what's really important, reliable and flexible thermal generation capacity is essential for the security of supply and the stability of the transmission grid. So from point of view of a TSO, it's definitely and absolutely necessary to have conventional power plants in the future. And I might leave you with this puzzled image. And just a final statement, the Energiewende consists of many components, and to achieve this goal, all parties need to work together. DSOs, consumers, TSOs, suppliers, everyone. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I could bring you a little bit nearer the challenges we are facing with in Germany. And I will leave you now with a picture of our main control room we have. So thank you very much for your attention.
I would like to ask you, how do you think future technology can help handling the mentioned problematic situations concerning info communication, big data processing, artificial intelligence, or virtual power plants?
It's a good question. Of course, new technologies are necessary and needed to face these challenges, especially for dealing with renewables and the possibility to maybe interfere with renewables, and also the possibility to interact with them as a possible source for reserves, for example. Therefore, of course, communication means and channels need to be established, and also, of course, this will increase the data volume you have to deal with. So this is definitely a point we have to take into consideration, and this is also a point which is developed, let me say like this. And of course, information technology is one step to guarantee the security of supply concerning all the challenges I've just shown you. And we are happy, or we are looking forward for every solution which will be provided to us, or let's say possible solutions provided to us, which we might include in which way or in one way or another in our system. But if you would ask me now if I had the solution, I could definitely say, no, I don't have it. I don't know if this covers your question now completely, but I hope so. Otherwise, please state again.
My question is about forecasting. So you said that there are some companies who are doing this, but if you are doing forecasting, so I would like to know what kind of models do you use? What's your mean absolute percentage error, including renewables and
Okay.
without them. And so as a TSO, what would you consider as a good forecast from a balancing group? I mean, yeah. And in your region, who's the best and what's his number?
I can definitely answer the last question. I don't know. I can't tell you who's the best and what's the number of this, but what we are doing with the forecast of the renewables. So as I've shown you, maybe I can go back there. So you have this forecast in the day ahead for wind, and we have this for PV as well, as I said, but just less lines because there are not so much providers, suppliers of this. What we are doing in the intraday market, so what you see here, the blue curve, which is the actual generation of wind. What we do on the intraday market, of course, is we are also interfering. So we are on the exchange, on the power exchange, selling energy, selling renewable energy, or buying energy if like, sorry, like in this case, we need to sell energy to go up with our forecast, or here we need to buy energy to decrease our situation more or less, so that the curves may work well. As I said, since we are interfering with this more or less intraday and day ahead, so we are dealing on the exchange 24/7 as well. So the whole time to try to be best possible, even if there's a deviation. But you asked for also for load forecast, or was it? Yes, for load. Okay, yeah, I can't tell you now which real algorithm is used or anything like this, because this are our specialists, and I'm not the specialist for this. But what I can tell you concerning wind forecast, for example, we get all of these different forecasts, and as I said, of all of these forecasts, we build our combination. In this combination, there is an algorithm behind, which takes into consideration the accuracy of each provider of the forecasts in the past. If he was really good, if he was really bad, and all of this. And on this way, for example, I don't think that this up here was taken into consideration on a high amount. It has been taken into consideration, but let's say maybe weighted by 5% or something like this. And others, like all of this here, of course, they weight much more to be taken into consideration. And something like this is done for load forecasting and all of the others as well. But sorry, I can't tell you the exact algorithm behind it. But this is something we developed in Amprion itself. And I don't think it's wrong to say that we have one of the best forecasts for this, concerning wind, definitely.
I would like to ask you that this is a very tremendous results about the renewables which did Germany, but we know that there's a lot of problems in the rise with these renewables. You don't speak about how much it's costed for the domestic customers, this development. The second one about the balancing problems, and of course the grid problems. You have talked more about it. Of course, the big problems about the investment, because you have to keep some reserve capacities, which use the capacity mechanism problems. And majorly, I want to ask you that in just EU, a little bit stopped new investments about the renewables. I mean that there's new state aid guidelines, which is limited the support of installation of renewables. What is just the German situation? How you will working with that? You cannot help in the new installations about the support of renewables. And there is the suggestion some type of premium for the renewables and the prices, and how this is the future in see that, because I think it's the big challenge for you.
That's definitely the right word, and it was the first one I would refer to, because we're not talking about problems, we're talking about challenges. This is one important thing we have to make clear. No, but I can't tell you the amount of money it costs the whole German customers, or even maybe European customers. I can assure it's a high sum. It's a lot of money, but on the other side, in Germany, and I showed this with the PV slide of installed capacity, that there was a decrease of newly installed capacities because the German federal government decreased the incentives and the support, the financial support to install new generation capacity, because in Germany we don't have the problem that we have not enough, you might say. Of course, you can always have more, and if you are thinking about the goals to cover 80% of generation in 2050, and you have the results in mind I showed you, that now we are at more or less 23%. Therefore, we would need, I can't imagine how much more generation capacity of renewables we would need to really face or cover 80%, because you can't not just say we have 20% now with 70,000. So we want 80%, so let's do 280,000. That's not really the right way to calculate it. So I'm not quite sure if in Germany we are facing the problem that the European Union also, or European Commission decided on decreasing or lowering the financial support. Because as you have seen, we did this as well in German national law, because the German government realized that the speed in which we have had an increase of generation might be a little bit too high to cover it, or to still guarantee the same security of supply as we have it nowadays. Because yeah, you have seen the volatility and the flexibility of the renewables, and we have to cope with all of this, and having this all over 2, 3, 4 years period only, it's not possible to cover it. So they need to give us some time as well to adapt all of our processes, to invent new tools and all of this to cover these new challenges. But I can't speak for the whole European market. I'm not so aware of the situation. I've shown you some numbers about the other countries of the installation capacity, but I'm not well aware if they're really facing the problem then now that no one else wants to invest in renewables anymore. But I can say again, for Germany, we have in Germany the case that there is a priority in feed for renewables. So I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Germany renewables are, if a renewable generation produces energy, we have to take this energy. So it's always feeding in if it produces. This causes also the problems on the market, you can say, because since you have to take it, even if the price is low, you have to take more of it, and the price even more decreases. But this won't change, and this is okay if it's not changing. But these are also challenges we are facing with, and therefore from time to time, some TSOs even need to interfere with renewables already and shut down renewables and increase some conventional power plants. Let's say in the north you have too much wind energy causing huge load flows to the south, but the capacity of the lines is not really capable of doing this anymore, so renewables need to be shut down or need to be decreased in their generation. And on the other hand, conventional power plants in the south need to be increased in production to cover or to work against this load flow. So I'm not 100% sure if I covered your question. If not, I'm sorry, but I'm willing to try again if you ask again. Yes. So
how can you manage the right of ways of these huge HVDC transmission lines in the densely populated area of Germany?
Yeah, that's actually really the problem we are facing. These are the lines we want to build. These are the lines actually were approved by the government. But still, of course, you have to cross some villages, some cities with high density of population. And these are the protests I talked about a little bit earlier we have to face. So just because we want them, or just because the law tells us you are allowed to build them, or actually you need to build them, you're obliged to build them, does not mean that we can do it like this. So there's a lot of discussion going on, and we, for several years already now, and not only because of the lines, also because all the equipment you need for the lines, the so-called converter stations you need for HVDC, which are huge halls you have to build, huge buildings you have to build. And yeah, a lot of people say, yeah, I don't want it, even if it's 10 kilometers away, because I still can see it somewhere on the horizon. There's something new I don't know, so I don't want it. And I can't tell you really a solution for it, but there's just, we really started an open discussion with everyone who might be affected by it, and to have a really transparent process of planning this and involving all the customers and all the people affected by it already in the process. So have a really open discussion. That's the only way it can work. Because if we're not living in some other countries where you just build it and don't care about the people. So we have to have the discussion, we have to have open discussion, and we have to have, well, we have now good discussions, not always, sometimes it's a little bit difficult as well. But that's why we have some numbers, or we have some years in mind when these lines shall be built and shall be operated. But usually these are years which we can't really then fulfill because of all the protests and also legislative problems we still face on this. So there's no real optimal solution. The only thing I can say is an open discussion, and this is the only way I think because the thing is you also need to make the people understand that it's for their own good. Of course, no one would be really happy if he has a big line besides his garden or something like this. Even if my boss once told me I don't understand this, because I'm always happy when I sit in the garden and I see the transmission lines in the back, because it's a beautiful scene. But that's not the view of everyone. But yes, having an open discussion and really explaining to people, because one of the most critical things we face is if you have the people, and that's for, I don't know the backgrounds of you, but it's good if you have like events like this and you join it, so you show interest. I think mainly most of you will have an engineering background or something like this, but it's more important to explain to, let's say, the normal people, not involving in any technical fields or electrical fields, to explain them that we have to do something like this to secure the supply in the future. And it's not working without extension of the grid. And yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Can't really say this in general, but actually, as I said at the end of the presentation already, get in a dialogue with the people, because people in one certain stage you will face the situation that you have to deal with the people concerning lines, concerning different other topics. So talk to the people in general, and from the beginning on have an open discussion with them, and everything else has to be developed. So yeah, that would be the main advice I could give you on that. I think what really is important, and what I wanted to make clear, that of course, renewables are the future, and we can't have a system without renewables in the future, but that there's a lot of things still have to be developed and also, yeah, let's say, taken into account and about this technology, let's call it like this, and that we are facing with renewables, of course, the fact that they are really volatile and unpredictable. So there always needs to be some secured amount of generation, which yeah, more or less needs to come from conventional power plants and not only renewables.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I think what we learned today in this lecture and in this presentation, that the German experience shows that all elements of the energy value chain will have a different role in the future. So the generators will have a different task in the future. They will produce less, but they will have to have their capacity available. The transmission system operators will have a different role. The distribution system operators, and of course the customers will have a different role, who are also producers at the same time. The regulator and the state will have a different role because they have to regulate the whole industry in a different manner. So I think this is the main message of today's presentation. I believe that the changes which started in Germany, and as we learned, Germany is heading the PV generation at the moment in the world, will come also to Hungary sooner or later. It may take a few years as the cost of the technology will be reduced, but it will come definitely also to Hungary, and we can only learn from the experience what Germany is already present will be the future of Hungary.
Well, basically, I think as an electrical engineering student that this was interesting because this was from the point of view of a German system operator. We used to hear news and actual technical news in the Hungary, but they aren't as accurate as a man who works and lives in that system can tell you.